From translation, Net New English Translation. This 77th day of the year. Today we are reading passages, Judges 1 to 2. Judges chapter 1, verses 1 to 36. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who will go up first for us to fight against the Canaanites?" The Lord said, "Judah will go up. Look, I have given the land into his hand." Then Judah said to Simeon, his brother, "Come up with me to my allotted territory, so that we can fight against the Canaanites. Then I will go with you to your allotted territory." So Simeon went with him. When Judah went up, the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 men at Bezek. They encountered Adoni-Bezek at Bezek, and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him and seized him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table, as I have done, so God has repaid me. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it, and they put it to the sword and set it on fire. Afterward, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who were living in the hill country, the Negev, and the lowland. Judah went against the Canaanites who were living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath-Arba, and they defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir, formerly called Kiriath-Sepher. Caleb said, "Whoever attacks Kiriath-Sepher and captures it, I will give my daughter Iksah to him as a wife." Othniel, son of Caleb, Kenaz's younger brother, captured it, so Caleb gave him his daughter Iksah as a wife. When she arrived, she incited him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What do you want?" She said, "Give me a special blessing. Since you have given me land in the Negev, also give me springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, which was in the Negev near Arad. They went and lived among the people. The men of Judah went with their brothers the Simonites and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they utterly destroyed it. So the city was called Hormah. Judah captured Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, along with their territories. But the men of Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites from Jerusalem. The Jebusites live with the people of Judah to this day. As for Hebron, Caleb dislodged the 3 sons of Anak. The Benjaminites did not dislodge the Jebusites living in Jerusalem, so the Jebusites have lived with the Benjaminites in Jerusalem to this day. The house of Joseph also went up to Bethel, and the Lord was with them. The house of Joseph sent spies to Bethel. The former name of the city was Luz. The spies saw a man coming out of the city and said to him, "Please show us how to enter the city, and we will deal well with you." So he showed them how to enter the city. They put the city to the sword, but they let the man and all his family go free. The man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city there, and he named it Luz. That is its name to this day. Manasseh did not dislodge the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or of Taanach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. The Canaanites were determined to live in this land. When Israel became strong, they made the Canaanites serve as forced labor, but they never drove them out completely. Ephraim did not dislodge the Canaanites who were living in Jezer, so the Canaanites have lived among them in Jezer. Zebulun did not dislodge the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites lived among them, but they were made to serve as forced labor. Asher did not dislodge the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Arlab, or of Achzib, or of Helba, or of Aphik, or of Rehob. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, who were living in the land. Naphtali did not dislodge the inhabitants of Bethshemesh, or the inhabitants of Bethanath, so they lived among the Canaanites, who were living in the land. However, the people of Bethshemesh and Bethanath were made to serve as forced labor for them. The Amorites forced the Danites into the hill country, for they would not allow them to come down into the plain. The Amorites were determined to live in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Shaalbim, but the hand of the house of Joseph was heavy against them, so they were made to serve as forced labor. The border of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akrabim, from Selah and upward. Judges chapter 2, verses 1 to 23. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim. He said, "I brought you up from Egypt, and led you into the land that I had solemnly promised to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And I said, you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. Why have you done this? So now I declare, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become snare to you, and their gods will become a trap for you." When the angel of the Lord had spoken these words to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud. So they named that place Bochim, and there they offered sacrifices to the Lord. Now Joshua son of Nun was dead, and the whole generation that had experienced the land's conquest was gone. The people who came after them did not know the Lord or the work he had done for Israel. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them from the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them. They bowed down to them and provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and worshipped Baal and the Ashtoreths. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he handed them over to plunderers who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies who were all around them. They were no longer able to resist their enemies. Whenever the Israelites went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to bring disaster, as the Lord had warned and as the sworn covenant he had made with their ancestors. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, "This nation has violated the covenant that I commanded them to keep. They have disobeyed me. So now I will no longer drive out any of the nations before them that Joshua left when he died. This will serve as a test for Israel, to see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it, as their ancestors did." The Lord had left those nations to test Israel, to determine whether Israel would obey the Lord's commands that he had commanded their ancestors to keep. The Lord had left those nations to test Israel, to determine whether Israel would obey the Lord's commands that he had commanded their ancestors to keep. The Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the power of those who plundered them. But they did not listen to their judges. Instead, they prostituted themselves to other gods and bowed down to them. They quickly turned from the way their ancestors had followed, who had obeyed the Lord's commands. They did not do as their ancestors did. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the power of their enemies all the days of the judge, for the Lord was moved to compassion because of their groaning, because of those who oppressed them and tormented them. But when the judge died, the people reverted to even more corrupt practices than their ancestors, following other gods, worshipping them, and bowing down to them. They did not stop their practices or their stubborn ways. The Lord was furious with Israel and said, "Because this nation has violated the covenant that I commanded them to keep, and has disobeyed me, I will no longer drive out any of the nations before them that Joshua left when he died. I will use these nations to test Israel, to see whether Israel will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it, as their ancestors did." The Lord left those nations to test Israel, to determine whether Israel would obey the Lord's commands that he had commanded their ancestors to keep. The Lord left those nations to test Israel, to determine whether Israel would obey the Lord's commands that he had commanded their ancestors to keep.